All right, we're going to get started. Thanks for joining us this morning. I'm Cassidy Ellis, Local Governments Program Manager here at SPEAR, and I run the City Efficiency Leadership Council, which is the kind of conduit for these webinars on city topics around energy management and energy efficiency. So we are recording and we're going to get going here. So the agenda today, just review a little bit about the council that I run for those of you who maybe are new to this conversation. A few announcements, and then I'm going to turn it over to our speaker to talk about resilience and CHP. So the City Efficiency Leadership Council, for those of you who haven't participated, and we've got someone maybe who could mute. Okay. I think we're good. So the City Efficiency Leadership Council is a collaborative of Texas cities and public entities working around energy management and adoption of best practices in the public sector. We interface with our public sector partners in a number of ways. We have regional roundtable luncheons, developed studies. Webinars are a new feature of the program, and we also offer some direct one-on-one assistance around baselining and benchmarking and technical support. We also have developed the City Efficiency Toolkit, which is a Texas-focused toolkit of efficiency resources. Many of you are also probably on my newsletters, which is my way of sharing events, information, news articles about the CELC. If you're interested in getting involved, if you're not already, reach out to me. We'll be having another round of luncheons in the summer in North Texas, Gulf Coast region, and Central Texas. Okay, a few announcements. So our next webinar is scheduled for May 16th, and it will be around the business case for street lighting, featuring Texas-specific insights on rate development, tariffs, and some successes in Wichita Falls. Working on a finance-focused topic for June, and open to suggestions and recommendations for other topics you'd like to see. SPEAR will be at the Summit Conference on April 30th and 2nd in Waco. I'll be talking about financing with a partner at Johnson Controls, and my colleague Liz will be talking about the building operator certification, as well as many other topics around public sector efficiency. And recordings are available. Just I can't. They're large files, so I'm happy to share them with you. But please shoot me an email, give me a call if you would like a recording of this. Okay, so our speaker today is Gavin Dillingham. He's Program Director at Clean Energy Policy at HARC and the Director of the U.S. DOE's South Central and Upper West CHP Technical Assistance Program. I will let Gavin introduce himself in more detail and take it away. So let me stop sharing. And Gavin, if you want to take over. There we go. And I'm going to mute myself. So thanks for joining us.
All right. Thanks, Cassidy. Good morning, everybody. Happy to have the opportunity to chat with everyone today on combined heat and power and distributed energy resources and how that can help resilience and reliability of critical infrastructure. That's been a key focus that we're starting to see, especially in Texas, with many of the weather events and natural disasters we've experienced in the last few years. We've been running into quite a bit of conversations around people really trying to figure out how to make critical infrastructure to operate during and after major events here. So as Cassidy said, my name is Gavin Dillingham. I know a few of you. I was looking at the participant list. It's good to see you guys on the call. And I operate out of HARC, the Houston Advanced Research Center. We're up in the Woodlands, Texas. We're a research institute focusing on air, energy, and water issues around the state, and particularly along the Gulf Coast. and my main focus is really on clean energy transition, decarbonization, and grid resilience here. So go ahead and get into what we're going to be talking about. Here's a quick outline. Probably going to be chatting for about 40 minutes or so. Get through these slides and open it up for any kind of discussions or questions that anyone may have, or just kind of feedback on the whole idea around resilience and critical infrastructure. So outline here, a quick CHP overview. In the state of CHP as far as, where installations are happening and who's doing what around the country and within the state. How things we need to start doing to improve resilience, how critical infrastructure can be improved with the CHP, different types of critical infrastructure examples, the installations and technical potential that's out there. There's quite a bit in Texas. Also covering resilience planning. The DOE came out with, recently finished a resiliency accelerator and came out with some really great tools to help with resilience planning. We're actually going to be up in Colorado, Fort Collins, soon to do some resilience planning for their city buildings. Case studies, so some project profiles that are local, and then just how to work with the Combined Heat and Power Technical Assistance Partnership. So first of all, who are we? The Department of Energy Technical Assistance Partnerships have been around for several years now, all focused on developing and promoting combined heat and power, which I'll go more specifically exactly what that is, but it is on-site power generation. We do a lot of work around end user engagement, and so webinars such as this, attending conferences, doing workshops, lunch and learns around the country that we focus on. We also do a lot of stakeholder engagement, and that's dealing primarily with regulators and policymakers, and just kind of educating on kind of best practices of what critical infrastructure or combined heat and power ordinances are out there, or legislation, or incentives and rebates, and just kind of help them understand what kind of the trends are around the country and how are ways to potentially include CHP and energy planning or critical infrastructure planning, emergency management planning, et cetera. And then the last piece we do, and we do quite a bit of this, we do technical services. And so this is largely doing very early stage technical assistance to help cities and, well, just a variety of market sectors see if CHP is a good fit for their particular site or a portfolio of sites or a campus, et cetera. And so these are very early stage studies that we do. We end up doing close to, I guess, about 70 a year of these studies. And so I'll go more into detail what those consist of here later. Just to give you a quick overview. So you see there's 10 different regions out there. Our group, Houston Advanced Research Center, is actually focused on the South Central, so the dark purple on the bottom, and then Upper West, which is the top purple. So we have 11 states that we cover. Quickly go into a CHP overview, just to kind of get everyone a heads up of what CHP is and how it works. So here we go with CHP. It's an on-site power generation source or a distributed energy resource. It sits proximate to a building or a campus, and it provides electricity there. And the key benefit of CHP is that you capture the waste heat that's coming off that generator, that turbine there, and you use that, and you can capture it and use it for a variety of different cooling, heating, processing, sterilization, dehumidification, domestic hot water, steam, etc. And so you have a higher efficiency system operating there versus what we traditionally use, which is a power plant, a centralized power plant generating power, and then having a boiler or a hot water heater on site providing that thermal service, or a chiller on site providing that cooling service there. So instead of having those two separate pieces there, we have the one CHP system that can provide both services at a more efficient and cost-effective rate there. Just a quick schematic here of how CHP works, going from left to right. Starting with the fuel, most of the systems, close to 70–80% of the systems in the United States are natural gas based. That being said, we see a growing number that are biogas based, particularly around wastewater treatment plants and food processing plants. But wastewater treatment plants definitely for cities and counties, public entities, has been a key growing area. And a lot of that is, instead of flaring that biogas or finding or looking for other uses for that biogas, using it to fuel the CHP system has been a key key driver. So that fuel moves a prime mover, variety of different prime movers here, essentially engines and turbines of varying sizes. I'll show you the different sizes here in a second. That turns a generator, which creates electricity on site. That prime mover, there's a heat recovery system for a heat exchanger there on the prime mover. And as I mentioned, it does all these, provides all these services from steam to hot water to space heating. And we're seeing a growing amount, especially in the South and Southeast and through Texas, for space cooling and process cooling and refrigeration. And a lot of that's coming from steam-driven chillers and absorption chillers that are coming down in price and actually improving in reliability. And they're actually just becoming much more competitive at this time. The different types of engine sizes. Traditionally, CHP has been seen something as more of a kind of a large industrial type application where you see these systems that are 250 megawatts, 300 megawatt systems off of gas turbines, or large steam turbines, or even some smaller reciprocating engines. But where we're really seeing the trends now are much smaller systems and a much wider variety of applications. So as you see here, the slide shows you all the way down to 5 kW. And there's actually systems out there now that can actually be placed in a home where you remove your hot water heater and replace that with a CHP system that can generate electricity and then provide the hot water to the house there. But we're seeing a wide variety of applications, and I'll show you more of these in a minute, but it's just quite impressive in the last few years how this application has been able to change and how the diversity has really helped get people more involved with this. Benefits of CHP, a lot of it is the efficiency benefits. So in a CHP system, compared to a traditional system, a grid system, you don't have that line loss. And so a lot of times when you're generating power off-site at a far distant location, that transmission line loss happens. So you're generating more power than needed actually at the site. You just have higher efficiency in that regard, lower operating costs, reduced emissions. These are typically very clean burning systems compared to the grid overall. And what we've mentioned, and I've kind of hit on already, and one of our main focus here is the growing understanding of the resilience and reliability that CHP can provide, especially to critical infrastructure. And there's some really good examples in Texas, especially during Hurricane Harvey, of systems that have been able to operate during and after some major flooding and wind events. And also what we're starting to see are utilities, municipal utilities, IOUs, et cetera, really looking at CHP and distributed energy resources in general to use them for what's called non-wire alternatives. So instead of rate casing a bunch of new transmission distribution infrastructure, they're looking for strategic placement of distributed energy resources such as solar battery systems or combined heat and power, or just even regular natural gas gensets around the grid to deal with any kind of grid congestion or other kind of reliability issues in the grid. So seeing a growing interest from utilities, which is very much different from what we've seen in the past. So where we are as far as where the market looks like, 81 gigawatts of CHPs installed across the country, about 4,400 different sites. It's about 8% of the total electricity generating capacity for the United States. As would be traditionally expected when you're looking at the capacity of CHP systems, you're just looking at the amount of gigawatts installed. Most of them are chemical and refining and pulp and paper, and that's largely because they're just very large systems that are out there. But what we're really starting to see, and this is kind of an interesting slide within the last few years, is that really there's been a lot of installs in the last few years, 151 installations since 2013 to 2017, the latest data we have there. And you'll just see a much wider diversity of systems that are going in. So once again, there's been about 3.6 gigawatts. That should be gigawatts instead of megawatts. Apologize for that. But on the right, this is on the right-hand pie chart. And you see the refining, pulp and paper, chemicals, food processing. Those are your traditionally real large or fairly large systems that are going in there. But you look at the installations on the left, 851 installs on the left, and you see non-traditional CHP systems such as multifamily buildings, hotels, wastewater treatment plants, hospitals, and as well as K through 12. And seeing quite a bit of K through 12 looking at it just due to the shelter in place and just them acting as shelter to last resort. Food processing continues to grow, and colleges and universities as well. So you're just seeing a much wider diversity of applications over the last few years that traditionally we had not seen due just to the flexibility of different types of equipment out there. So the key area we wanted to kind of talk about is how CHP can help with improving resilience. as many of you know, and many of you may have seen this slide before, 2018 was pretty nasty when you're looking at severe weather events and the impact and their actual costs. Each one of these are billion-dollar events, and so there were about $11 billion plus events in 2018. These caused significant economic and community issues, and a lot of that had to do with power outages from western wildfires causing transmission distribution lines to go down, or even them causing the fires. Drought, which can severely derate or curtail the operations of water-cooled large natural gas or coal-fired or nuclear plants. Tornadoes, which hurts transmission distribution lines, hurricanes as well. So there's a lot of these events out there having significant impacts on power of utilities providing power due to damage to the transmission distribution infrastructure as well as generation assets. And so CHP systems on site, you take away that transmission distribution risk. And you also, since these are air-cooled systems, you're not as concerned about water availability or water temperature as well. So, but just a lot of growing impacts from climate and weather disaster. So how does CHP increase resilience for end users? And so people that own and operate buildings, energy managers, facility managers, et cetera. The focus here is really the CHP can provide that continuous electricity and thermal energy for critical loads. It operates 24/7, not like a natural gas or diesel generator that will pop on when the power goes off or whenever there's some sort of disruption in power there. So it operates 24/7, providing a benefit on a continuous basis. CHP can operate in a black start and an island mode, which essentially means it can completely separate itself from the grid and operate in isolation. And it can continue to operate for multiple days, particularly when tied to a natural gas distribution system, which we're actually going to be doing a webinar at the latter part of April that talks about the resilience and reliability of natural gas infrastructure and the pipelines, because that's really a concern of some folks, is when and how does the natural gas system go down. And what we largely see is that it's highly reliable and resilient, particularly during some major natural disaster events in most cases there. For utilities, the big focus here, and I kind of alluded to this, is the grid stability and grid congestion by properly placing CHP systems around their utility territory to help kind of support the grid and provide services to the grid there. And also we're seeing CHP being deployed a lot more in microgrid applications, either a natural gas system or a CHP system to help support the solar battery component and just kind of help make a microgrid more robust. For communities, the primary focus, of course, is just making sure critical infrastructure stays operational and that first responders and that the hospitals and that just all the service providers can continue to provide services during and after a major event. So we're talking about different types of critical infrastructure. What do we mean by that? It's really stuff that could have if it goes down, it could have a substantial negative impact on national security or economic security, public health and safety. So we'll go to a more specific list here in a minute. But really, we want to make sure that you understand that CHP can provide some significant benefits with its 24/7 operation and really allow critical infrastructures to continue to operate during and after a major event. One of the key things that need to be kept in mind when designing and when putting in place a CHP system, so when you're talking to an engineering company or you're talking to an ESCO or you're just contemplating CHP, is to make sure it has the right components there, because you can install CHP, and we've seen this in the past, that it's not properly configured, and so it can't operate when the power goes down. It essentially has to shut off because it doesn't have the right interconnection with the grid there. So really some key components here that have to be considered. It has to have black start capability, so it has to be able to start and get going once the grid goes down. It has to be able to operate independently of the grid. It needs to have ample carrying capacity, so you want it to operate more than just for exit signs or some lights in the building. You want it to be able to carry vital services within that building. And so that's one of the key areas we kind of talk about and focus on to make sure that that proper load is being provided. And it must, have the appropriate switchgear controls, interconnection controls, and operate in parallel with the utility there. So just things that have to be kept in mind when you're looking at CHP systems to make sure it's properly designed and developed to provide the services you need during a power outage. One of the other areas that's critical, and this is actually TECO down in the medical center in Houston. It provides a significant amount. It's a district energy system providing cooling, heating, steam, as well as power to a large portion of the downtown medical center here. The picture actually shows you Brays Bayou going along southern part of the Texas Medical Center there. And the picture on the left is normal times. The picture on the right is Hurricane Harvey. Fortunately, there's a pretty substantial flood wall based on prior events that have made TECO understand the need for this flood wall. But around there, the system is able to operate without any flooding, without any negative impacts from Harvey. But the key consideration here to think about is just when you're designing these systems, make sure they're designed in a way that they can deal with the high wind issues, flooding issues, any kind of major weather event that was disrupting the overall grid. It's not disrupting your CHP system. This is a nice slide we like to show because typically the default when we're talking to folks is we'll just go with the diesel backup generator. The problem with diesel backup generators, although the first cost is great, they're really cheap, they're easy to get in there, they meet your life safety rules and all that kind of stuff, they're not highly reliable. And the fuel source to keep them fueled over time, or especially over a prolonged power outage, is very difficult, particularly if there's issues with damage to roads or there's debris in the roads and you just can't get your diesel truck there. And so we really want people to understand that although CHP may be a little more expensive on the up end, on the front end, you look at it over time and the long-term cost benefit analysis through the life cycle of these plants. The resilience and reliability benefits, as well as the overall emissions and energy savings, is key here and needs to be really taken into account whenever these systems are being considered here. Just some examples of critical infrastructure. Many of these are specific to facilities, government facilities in general, police stations, fire stations, airports, wastewater treatment plants. If you're a county, maybe you're operating some hospitals, nursing homes, etc. So prisons is another one. Schools, if there's school districts on the phone here. Just all key areas that can and have demonstrated successful use of CHP to keep the power on. It's a wide diversity of systems, from very small systems to very large systems, and very small buildings to large buildings that can use this stuff. We really find police stations and fire stations work pretty well, especially with smaller CHP applications, because most of those have 24/7 operation. They have ongoing demand for domestic hot water and power there. Prisons are also really good applications. And I already mentioned the wastewater treatment plants, especially those with anaerobic digesters. There we can grab that biogas and use that for the fuel there. Just some examples of technical potential. I kind of wanted to go into that next here. This is just a slide kind of showing where all these systems are around the country. You really see a bunch of that network up, or that clustering up there in the Northeast. A lot of that came out of Hurricane Sandy. There was actually, we did a study looking at from 2000 to I think 2015 or 2016, I'm sorry, looking at the impact of major storm events and windstorms affecting power outages across the country. And it was really kind of interesting when you look along the Southeast, the Gulf Coast, the Southeast, with all the hurricanes and all the power outage events we see, you can see a small number of actual CHP systems being installed for critical infrastructure applications there. But when you kind of take into account Hurricane Sandy, when that hit, we essentially see this Hurricane Sandy bump that happened in 2012, 2013, and hundreds of systems were installed up through there. And a lot of that had to do with the fact that the state of New Jersey created a resilience bank. NYSERDA up in New York created some incentive and rebate programs. Massachusetts developed a program for microgrids, I believe. And so there was just really a lot of focus due to the performance of existing CHP systems. There was a lot of focus to get more CHP installed up around there in that part of the country. And they've actually, New York, New Jersey, Massachusetts have been really leading a lot of the installations. The stuff over on the far west coast, most of those installations, specifically in California, are coming out of the what's called the SGIP program, the Self-Generation Incentive Program at this point. For the state of Texas, there is actually some CHP rules on the books here, and that is a critical infrastructure legislation that was passed. I believe it was about 3 or 4 legislative sessions ago, 2003 or so, or 2013. I'm sorry. That was really focused on state critical infrastructure and making sure that when states are building new buildings or doing major renovations, that they take into account and do an economic analysis for CHP. And if CHP does fit, then kind of go down the road and see if it can work for that particular facility. But if it doesn't economically, it's not making sense, then they don't have to do anything. But that was kind of one of the first steps that Texas took in order to kind of bolster that critical infrastructure, was that requirement for state county organizations to look at what's deemed critical infrastructure, and if they're building new stuff, to do an economic assessment of those. Louisiana did a similar thing right after Texas passed it. Louisiana passed a very similar policy as well there. But if anyone has any state or county or school districts that have any questions about that particular legislation requirements around that, CECO actually has a web page. It's the CHP guidelines. We help CECO put that together, that you can kind of learn more and see if your facilities would qualify under that, or would be expected to do that if there are new buildings being built. Where are we seeing the CHP critical infrastructure installations? So this is just looking at different subsectors here, similar to the last slides here as far as who are the actual players. But you see a good number of CHP critical infrastructure systems are out there, about 8.5 gigawatts. About a quarter of all the sites that are installed in the United States are focused on critical infrastructure, and good number of them at multifamily sites, colleges, schools, food processing, hospitals, wastewater treatment plants, and nursing homes. The lodging piece, so hotels and motels have really been interesting in the last few years. Especially since there's now smaller CHP applications that are out there. So hotels are actually using them now. And we've been doing a lot of these in our Upper West region. And so it's from a hotel from the size of a La Quinta up to a large kind of luxury resort, but they all have the same kind of goal in mind, is to use the CHP system to heat their pools. And so they use it also for some domestic hot water. They'll use it some for cooking purposes in their kitchens. But a lot of it, their motivation is they want 24/7, 365 operations of their pools. So they look to CHP to provide that kind of lower cost benefit, other than, instead of, having a kind of a dedicated boiler or dedicated pool heater there, they can use a CHP system to make that piece work there. So just a little inside information on there. I know you guys really don't work on, typically on hotels and lodging, but it's kind of an interesting story coming out there. And there's been a lot of those coming up in the last few years. The other really interesting one is multifamily. And we're seeing definitely a growing number of those coming out across, from just kind of your traditional kind of, 2-story multifamily sprawling complexes to mid-rise to high-rise multifamily. It really kind of runs the gamut there. And particularly useful for those multifamily apartments that have kind of the central boiler or central, hot water heaters there. So we really have to be specific on what those multifamily properties look like as well there. So anyway, just a wide diversity of opportunities. There's colleges and universities. I think we're doing about 6 studies right now, just specific to colleges and universities. And there's actually a really good system just went in Wesleyan University in Fort Worth. It was a 2G package system. We did a tour of that and a lunch and learn of that. And that's really an interesting application, because it's only for one specific building. Traditionally, for colleges and universities, it would tie into a district cooling or heating or district energy system. Now you're seeing, due to the smaller sizes and flexibility of CHP applications, that they're looking at them for specific buildings, particularly research buildings that have a high need of steam or high need for sterilization as well. And we're actually, there's another one we're doing at Colorado College in Colorado Springs, Colorado. They just finished a new site, and it's the first net zero research library in the country, and they're using a CHP microgrid. So they're using solar panels and CHP as well as geothermal to do a pretty cool system up there that makes them net zero. And it's, as I said, the first academic research library in the country that's able to pull that off there. So a lot of really cool applications happening across a variety of sectors. Just where's the CHP potential? It's not surprising that Texas, due to our just size, has some very significant critical infrastructure potential out there, followed by these other fairly large industrial states. A key area I wanted to kind of go into is the resilience planning efforts that the Department of Energy has been promoting. There was recently, and it actually happened over the last few years, there was a lot of work with the Resiliency Accelerator with the Department of Energy. Some of you may have participated. It was opened up to cities, counties, states, universities, I think even the private sector as well, to start thinking about how distributed energy resources and specifically combined heat and power CHP can be used to really improve the resilience of sites. And so they came out with multiple tools at this point. And I'm sure when Cassidy shares these slides, you can access these links here, the one here on the bottom. But they really came out with some really nice tools, really help cities and communities and those that hold large portfolios of buildings to really work on their resilience planning efforts and make sure they understand how to prioritize and understand what their critical infrastructure assets are, which ones would have the most and highest likelihood of being a successful application, if it's a solar battery, if it's CHP, if it's some sort of microgrid, you know, and just really kind of help with the decision making around that. So first of all, they came out with a distributed generation for resilience planning guide. It's an exhaustive planning guide. It's pretty amazing. It's an online tool or an online guidebook. You can find the link down at the bottom here. That does a really nice job of covering pretty much every piece you need to consider when looking at your portfolio of buildings or a campus. Next to that is the CHP for Resilience screening tool, which is fed a lot by the planning guide. I'll go more into that in a minute. They also did a really nice issue brief on performance of different types of distributed energy resources and different disaster events. Cover that more in a second. And then they did partner profiles. So those that participated in this accelerator, just kind of some of their best practices and lessons learned as they were doing CHP in their community. So first of all, distributed generation for resilience planning guide. This doesn't really do it justice here, but you can see there's a variety of resources here that can work with decision makers. If you're a policy or regulatory maker, a policy maker or a regulator, or if you're a facility manager, an energy manager, helps you. If you're a utility, you know, utilities when they're doing the resilience planning and energy planning, but just really kind of talks you through the steps that you need to take to make sure that you have the right understanding of the vulnerabilities of your sites and how to best prioritize. The CHP for Resilience screening tool. This is actually they've just came out with a web-based tool, but there's also an Excel spreadsheet that you can download. I think the Excel spreadsheet is still a better tool because it allows for a lot more flexibility, and I think you have a lot more different options you can kind of include. Their online tool, which you can find at the link below, the online tool is just not as robust. Still a good tool, but just not as robust as the Excel spreadsheet that they have. But in any case, what this does is walks you through essentially 3 tabs on the Excel spreadsheet. Resilience screening. So you start talking about your different types of critical infrastructure that you have. How would you start ranking them? And it starts providing you these different, based on the criteria that's listed, provides you different ranks of just different rankings of your profile, of your portfolio there. And then once it goes in kind of the resilience screening, that can allows you then to go more specifically into a high-level CHP screening for resilience. And then once you go through that piece there, it actually gives you kind of a red, yellow, green stoplight assessment there to kind of let you know the green stuff is really high potential down to the red stuff that really has no potential. And that's really specific to kind of the resilience metrics, resilience variables that they're considering there. So it's a nice tool. As I mentioned, we're actually going to be doing this for Fort Collins, Colorado. They've asked for kind of a resilience assessment of their site, and that's in conjunction with the Colorado Energy Office out there. So we're happy to do it across communities. It's really an easy tool to use, or we would be happy to just kind of get on the phone and talk about how to use the tool and how to help folks work through this. So in any case, it's a great tool that the DOE's put out that I think really can provide some good benefits to cities and counties. The other one just wanted to mention quickly here is the issue briefs. And this is a really interesting slide. There's this, you see the little dots here on the left or on the right, and just kind of talks about the different types of resources out there. And so this covers everything, all the distributed energy resources that are out there. If it's a solar, if it's battery, if it's geothermal, if it's CHP, if it's a natural gas generator, and walks it through a variety of different disaster events. If it's drought, fire, hailstorms, blizzards, etc. And really to kind of help understand which distributed energy resource performs best under these different types of operations, or different types of weather events. And so it's really kind of a nice matrix that they put out, and they put descriptions around each one of the distributed energy resources. It allows you to really kind of get a feel for what would potentially, based on your understanding of kind of the weather patterns and what's happening in your community, what may have the best chance to provide you the most beneficial resource there. The findings from the report really was pointing to a more of a microgrid type approach, so a combination of solar, battery, and CHP systems, or solar, battery, and natural gas genset. But just it shows you that kind of that robustness that can come from having multiple systems, multiple power sources there at the same time operating. And one of the things that we actually do at HARC when we look at this stuff is, when we're looking at microgrids, is how do you optimize those microgrids for market conditions? Because especially in ERCOT's market, with the price volatility, there's different times in which you should be producing power, other times you should be taking it from the grid. When should you be producing power off your solar? When should you be putting solar into your battery to have your battery operate at a later time? All these different components that you need to be thinking about to ensure you have the most optimized system for size of system, as well as the operating strategies for that system to make it most cost effective and resilient as possible. So in any case, this is a nice issue brief here that provides you just that whole list of distributed energy resources and lets you kind of know how they perform under different types of next thing I wanted to go into here was the project snapshots. And so this is just a handful of examples. There's the Department of Energy has about 200 or so of these project profiles that are out there. And so we've just grabbed a handful of the snapshots from those profiles to kind of this is a great example of how CHP has been able to kind of come in and help University of Texas Medical Branch in Galveston. After Hurricane Ike, UTMB, UTMB was devastated by Hurricane Ike, essentially shut it down and flooded it out. And there was a lot of discussion of whether or not UTMB would come back. But due to the fact that it's a trauma hospital and the only one on the island, and that it also does a lot of biohazard, or kind of really looks at these really kind of nasty viruses and that people really don't want to be placed anywhere else. So they decided, let's keep everything at UTMB on the island. So in any case, they came back, rebuilt UTMB from the ground up, and put in two CHP systems, one on the east side and one on the west side of the campus there, about 12 megawatts. When Hurricane Harvey came in, UTMB actually lost two power feeds both of its power feeds onto the campus. The CHP system was up and running and kept everything moving along as expected, and they did not have to evacuate or curtail operations or anything like that. The way they were able to do that is they essentially built a flood wall around the CHP plant, They also elevated all of their critical mechanical, electrical power systems at least the second floor level there to make sure that the distribution systems and everything kind of operate as needed throughout there. So really a great example. There's a lot of case studies that's been written on this project and kind of show how you need to really take into account that severe weather risk and make sure that you build appropriately. Another one, this is the Village Creek Water Reclamation Plant in Fort Worth, Texas. It was built back in 2012. This is the example of using, this is actually uses the natural gas system here for this particular plant. It's a 5.2 megawatt combustion turbine. The primary driver behind this one was to save money. The other one was to not flare the gas that was out there and make sure that that gas is used appropriately and in the most economic fashion as possible. And that was, we actually did a project profile on this one and grabbed the snapshot data from that. So it's a great project example. This one's been around for a bit, about 10 years now, but we like to pull it out. This one is, of course, the Dell Children's Medical Center in Austin, Texas. This is one is actually now owned by Austin Energy, kind of showing and demonstrating that utilities are taking a growing interest in CHP plants and trying to figure out how they can make that a part of their portfolio, particularly as they look at ways in which to reduce costs and not have to build out expensive transmission distribution infrastructure. But one of the great benefits of this particular project is the CHP plant did help them meet their LEED Platinum certification. It's one of the key criteria that was included in that. A couple that are outside of Texas but are just kind of interesting examples that may be applicable, especially to larger cities that are operating landfills. This is one that's a landfill where we're grabbing the landfill gas off of that, feeding it into a small reciprocating engine. And that's used at their resource recovery center that is right across the street, essentially. So nice, nice application here. So, so in this particular case, we're actually using that landfill gas instead of propane, which has saved them a pretty significant amount of money from making that switch there. So just a good example there. And the last one is just a small airport, the Bradley Airport up in Connecticut. Of course, the key piece of critical infrastructure to keep those planes operating and up in the air. The main focus here was the amount of power outages they were getting at this airport and how to curtail those outages. And then also they just saw there were some pretty significant savings they could do there for both the cooling and the heating. And so they were about to undergo a major renovation of their site. They were thinking about boilers and chillers. And they were like, well, what if we try CHP? We can displace those boilers, or at least have them run at a lesser time. And then bring in maybe absorption chillers and steam-driven chillers to provide the cooling at that site. So this was one of those things where they saw both the resilience, reliability benefit, as well as a major cost savings benefit. All right, so last section here is how to implement a CHP project with the help of the CHP TAP. And so as I mentioned, we do a lot of technical assistance, and that's from very early stage screenings where we gather utility bill data, which I imagine many of you that are energy managers on this call have that at your fingertips. So we grab that type of data. We also have a really short site survey we send out that just asks about some of the thermal and cooling requirements and operational hours, et cetera. We knock those out in about a week, get that back to you as with a little spreadsheet and a letter that kind of explains the results and gives you an idea of what the payback would be, what the cost would be, what your size of the CHP system would be, et cetera. So really something easy for planning purposes or to take to your chief financial officer or finance director, help you build a business case if CHP was something you wanted to do. The other stuff we do is largely just kind of act as an owner's rep. We help from the procurement process. We help with third-party reviews. We review drawings. We review investment grade audits. We also just help with any of the concerns around interconnections, permitting, making sure that you kind of have that support that's needed to work through everything. And all this is done due to the wonderful generosity of the federal government through your taxpayer dollars. So there's no cost to any of this work that we do. It's all free services provided by the CHP TAP here. So no worries about paying anything for any of these kinds of support. Some of the resources that we would like to point out, if you're just dying to learn more about CHP technologies, And the prime movers that we discussed earlier, these fact sheets are great. Great overviews. They talk about the different costs per kilowatt, operation maintenance concerns, best applications for a reciprocating engine versus a turbine. So just kind of help you be informed when someone comes and talks to you, if it's an engineering company or an ESCO, and say, hey, let's do a CHP plant. You at least know what they're talking about, and you know what kind of technologies to be thinking about. There, the primer report on the right is also a really nice overview of CHP. If you want to learn more about that, or have some friends and family you want to share that with, and help educate them about the benefits. Project profile database, that's where we get the snapshots, but that does a really nice job. There's over 200 of those, kind of explaining why organizations did CHP, what are the best practices, what were the lessons learned, how are they using CHP on their site. And then EPA has done a really nice job over redoing their policies and incentive database. This one, it's replacing Desire. Desire is no longer supported by Department of Energy, so EPA decided to stand up and do the CHP policy. It's a really good resource there. There's a database out there of all the different installations. If you're curious what's happening in Fort Worth or what's happening in El Paso or Austin, this database tells you what's going on there. And then, of course, you guys don't really need to worry about this, but because Texas is kind of our geography here, and we manage that piece. But typically, we talk to larger national audiences and want to make sure people understand we're all over. So what's some of the next steps? A lot of it is, really seeing if there's an interest in doing any type of resilience assessments, if there's an interest in CHP for any kind of screening, and then also just if you know of any CHP sites that are out there that we could potentially do project profiles on. So just to kind of sum things up here, CHP has really become a proven technology to really help with critical infrastructure. There's a lot of good opportunities to do this cost effectively, to help with things from LEED, to make sure you're meeting LEED certification, to making sure you keep the lights on, reducing energy costs, reducing burden on your budget, and energy burden overall. So I wanted to wrap it up with that, and I guess we can open it up for questions or comments. So what do you think, Cassidy?
Yeah, thank you so much. That was fantastic. So for Q&A, each of you should have two options, the Q&A button to type in questions, and then raise hand. If you raise your hand, I can unmute you. And I already have someone raising their hand. Quickly before we get into questions, I will follow up with all attendees on information about the natural gas infrastructure webinar, Gavin, if you can share that with me. The link to the SECO guidelines, and I'll also share your slides. If any questions have to do with that, I got you covered. So, Kevin, you're up. Oh. Not letting me unmute you. All right, Kevin, you might need to type in your question. I'm not sure why it's not letting me unmute you. Sorry. While you're doing that, we have a question in the question box. So this might be a little bit of a can of worms, Gavin, but how does CHP assets fit into kind of the incumbent utility market? Who owns the asset? How is it billed? Is it billed at all? And does it differ between the deregulated versus the munis and co-ops? Kind of how does it work?
Sure. So for the ERCOT's market, for the deregulated market, there's different ways in which these CHP systems can be owned. Sometimes they are owned and operated by the site itself. So if you're city and you're looking to put these into police stations, you essentially install them behind the meter and you provide the thermal and power systems to that site. And essentially you just are paying less electricity to the utility. Based on how much electricity and thermal you're providing to that site may change your rate, but that's something you're going to have to work with on your retail electricity provider, to your rep. And same with regulated markets. There may be, in some cases, there is a CHP rate or some sort of difference in rates charged. But it just really depends from utility to utility. What we're seeing a lot now, though, is third-party ownership. So essentially, there's companies that do design, build, own, operate, and maintain. Siemens actually has a program called DBOOM. I'm not advocating or saying Siemens is anyone you need to go for. I'm just saying as an example of a third-party ownership model, and that seems to be, the third-party ownership seems to be a trending area. And what you do there is you do a energy service agreement or some sort of, it could be an energy service agreement where you pay a certain rate back to that third-party owner, and you're essentially leasing your space and or providing that space for them to own and operate that system on your site, and you're just receiving the benefit of that thermal and power there. It kind of varies from system to system and size of systems. Small systems, typically like micro turbines. I mean, it really depends on your application. But we are seeing a growing trend towards third-party ownership where there's some sort of like rate structure that's between the third-party owner and keeps it off the balance sheet, keep it part of operational budget versus a capital budget item, and that work better for some folks as well.
Great. And I seem to recall in municipal or in munis and co-ops, it's that, do you have a little bit more information about how those are when, I guess, another entity is not allowed to sell power? Is there any barriers in munis?
It really depends from muni to muni that you're looking at. Austin Energy may negotiate a different rate with you based on the size of the CHP system. But places like Austin Energy, CPS are seeing a significant benefit of having more of this on there, as long as they can see it, having this distributed energy resource on their grid, because it helps them with their non-wire alternative focused, where they're not having to pay as much of the transmission distribution piece, because you're seeing PUCs put on some of those rate cases now because they're concerned about stranded costs. And utilities becoming a lot more friendly towards this at this time. Most of the time, the CHP systems are built in a way that they're focused more on the thermal services. Instead of providing all the power to the site, they're focused more on making sure all the thermal is provided to the site. That's typically the most cost-effective approach there. So the exporting of power back to the grid is sometimes, in many cases, is not a concern. For that, you're still interconnected. You just don't have to worry as much about that whole additional, what if I'm going to export and how am I getting paid for that export? Is there net metering, or is there some sort of for exporting this stuff versus not? In most cases, any export power back to the grid, when you're sending power back to the grid, from what we've seen, is just you get it at the wholesale rate. So.
Okay. You have a kudos, great presentation. And could you talk a little bit more about CHP opportunities, applications for K through 12, which are often used as emergency shelters?
Yes, we are seeing more of that happening, and a lot of it is because they are emergency shelters. They're shelters of last resort. And so you're seeing, what we've seen are smaller CHP applications. So for a shelter to school, it's focused maybe in the assembly hall or the gymnasium or the gynatoriums, whatever they're called, cafetoriums, the big cafe or cafeteria / gym / meeting room. Essentially try to design and install a CHP system that can operate the administration part of the building and the gymnasium common area of the building. And so, yeah, absolutely, those are starting to come into more and more use, especially as the CHP systems become smaller and more modular at this point. So, yeah, I think it's really a growing application across the country, just due to the role these places have within the community. A lot of it also, we're seeing interest to be able to start valuing resilience when you're doing your pro forma and you're doing that, your financial analysis. And we recently did this for an airport system. into place what resilience benefit they get. So if we have a business disruption or we have disruption in general, what's that cost to us? How does that impact our revenue, or how does that impact our ability to operate, and can we quantify that? And so you're seeing a growing ability and interest of companies and organizations wanting to value that and put it as part of their pro forma and make that part of their decision-making process, which a few years ago you would not have seen that, but I think people are getting more comfortable with that at this point.
Absolutely. And in the public sector, maybe particularly in schools, are you seeing that those are typically bond funded or funded by third party through ESCO or Energy as a Service or some other arrangement?
It's a combination. You're seeing it in both ways going in there. So especially if school districts or public agencies already have an ESCO lined up, you're seeing that as part of what the ESCO is proposing, or as part of their investment grade audit is taking into account CHP or just distributed energy resources in general, because it's being asked of them to take that into consideration. So you're seeing that from but then you're also seeing it as part of the overall. They have a nice bond that's out there building new schools. That's been taken into consideration as well. But obviously the case is within kind of an ESCO energy agreement type model.
Great. And in our last couple minutes, can you touch a little bit more on the residential side? That was new information to me, that residential systems are popping up. Is that for single family or just multifamily?
No, that's single family. We were all kind of, when the technology started hitting the market, and we started hearing more about it last year in Colorado, and this company was demonstrating, and they have some applications out there now, and it's essentially replaces your hot water heater. So you go and take your hot water heater out, CHP system in there. It has a container for that hot water, but the CHP provides the power to the house, and then it heats the water and holds that water until it's used. So yeah, it's a single family house, and it's there. I'm not saying it's really cheap. It's not something probably most people can go and do at this point. We're seeing it in kind of higher end custom homes, but it's definitely the technology was there that was not there just a few years ago, and like anything else, it's coming down in price and be fairly cost effective, I would think, in the next 2 years, just as normal people. So.
Yeah, well, that is incredible. Well, we are at time. Thank you so much, Gavin. Anyone on the call, if there's any other resources besides the things that I've mentioned, please ask me for them, and a survey will be following. Please fill it out. Your feedback is very important to me. All right. Have a good rest of your day, everybody.
All right. Thank you, guys.